Welcome everyone to English Department Career Day. You are the few English majors who are interested in working after you get a degree. And for that I commend you. My name is Nick Taylor. I'm a professor here in the department, and together with Marta Wyatt of the Poets and Writers Coalition, I organized this event. And I asked a few of our graduates and friends to come here to talk about a couple of topics. The first panel today is about work in technology. And so I've asked some people who all come from non-technical backgrounds, that is, not engineering or hard science, but who make their living or have made their living in technology here in Silicon Valley. And before I get started and introduce the panel, I wanted to say a little bit about why this subject is dear to my heart. I was an English major many years ago in Virginia, and when I graduated, this was during the first dot-com bubble, before the turn of the last century. And there were lots of tech jobs in Northern Virginia, which is the DC suburbs, and which has on and off over the years been a kind of subsidiary of Silicon Valley on the East Coast with a lot of tech money and that kind of thing. And I looked at the classified ads in the Washington Post, which was our local paper, and found a job with a tech company, a company that was making computerized training modules. This was more or less before this stuff was distributed on the web. They were making DVDs, or CD-ROMs, that would, with a proprietary authoring software, kind of like Adobe Flash, but this was pre-Flash. And we were training people on how to use, training office workers on how to use Microsoft Office applications, and also training programmers on how to learn Java. So the two product lines. And my job was as an editorial assistant. That's how I began. And from there, I got a little bit more into the technology and decided that I wanted to work on this new amazing thing called the web, and started working for a web consulting firm in Washington, D.C. And went on like this, going from company to company, most of which don't exist anymore, which is a pretty common experience these days, to have a lot of dead companies on your resume. Don't worry about it. Everybody does. And ended up getting more into the programming side, and I was doing a lot of web and database programming and systems administration for another computer consulting firm. And so I made my living for a long time programming computers, but I was writing at night and on the weekends, and my background was in writing, and I always wanted to be a writer, and I always kept my eye on that. But there was nothing stopping me from going into this other line of work, because I was a bright young person and I could train myself to do whatever I wanted. It was hard to do in Virginia because it wasn't the Silicon Valley. There wasn't as much opportunity in that. But for a long time, it paid my bills very well until I went to grad school, and even after graduate school, and I went in creative writing. I went back to programming computers, and I found it to be a wonderful way to make a living, because it used a different part of my brain. And so after a day of programming computers, yes, I went back and got on a different computer to write, but it was a totally different experience. It was a totally different type of work that I was doing. And so I wanted to have this panel to show not just my path, but several different models for you, so that you can see how people have been able to bridge this, what's perceived as a divide between skills in the humanities, training in the humanities, and work in technology. They're not as dissimilar as you'd think. So without further ado, I want to introduce our panel. At the far left, your far right, we have Kirstin Chen, who was a Steinbeck Fellow here at the Martin Luther King Library last year, and who worked for a while for Google as a contractor working on their Google Offers product. And then to her right, your left, we have Pollyanna Macchiano, who is a recent grad of our very department. and is now working for Adobe down the street. She rode her bike here.
I did.
To Pollyanna's right, we have Paul Coutts, who graduated in 2004 from the broadcast journalism program here, and has worked in broadcast journalism, but most recently moved over to Google, and he's been there for a number of years. And to his right, we have Tara Wyatt, who I believe you're due to graduate next year, right?
Yes.
Yes, and she works as a technical writer?
Yes.
That's right, and has for a number of years. And she took my creative writing class last year, and her editing skill was impeccable. So I asked her back for this event, and she can talk some about that aspect of the business. So I'd like to ask each of the panelists to kind of speak, introduce themselves, and talk a little bit about what it is you do at work, in the most basic sense, because you're speaking here to this audience and online to everyone who's watching, an audience that may not know exactly what it is that happens in these technology companies besides, some geek programming, because these are huge companies with lots of different roles, and I think it would be important to explain that. So, Kirstin?
Do you want me to start? Okay. Hi, so I'm Kirstin. Currently, I just sold my first novel, so I'm writing full time, but while I was a Steinbeck Fellow, I was a contract copywriter at Google for Google Offers. Do you guys know what Google Offers is? So basically, it's a daily deals type website, and they send discounted offers to local businesses to a list of subscribers. So some of our major competitors are Groupon and Living Social. You may have heard of some of those. And so each of these offers, they can be something like 50% off your local Italian restaurant, or $30 off a haircut, or something like that. And each of these offers features information about the deal, and then also a small profile of the business. And so that was my job, was to write the copy that went out with each offer. And it wasn't actually as mundane as it may sound. A company like Google and like Groupon, Living Social, these are companies that sort of pride themselves on having this kind of young, fun, edgy image, and they want that to carry through all of their products. And so that was my job, was to sort of make this copy exciting and unexpected, and something that a subscriber would want to read even if they weren't necessarily interested in the product. And so my editors actually paid a lot more attention to the writing than you would think. So that was something that was rewarding for me. And what the other thing that I really liked about it was that something that Nick mentioned was that it seemed to tax a different part of my brain. So it was rewarding and it was interesting, but I was still able to write my fiction and to devote myself to that as well. Should I talk about the logistics about freelancing?
Sure.
Yeah. So I was a contract worker, and so I was paid hourly. I didn't get any benefits. However, the hourly pay was much, much better than anything in academia, which is where I was before. So I was adjuncting at a college out in Boston before I moved out to California, and the pay at Google was understandably, expectedly way better than that. And I think that a lot of the companies also do hire full-time workers, and so there's that option as well. And Google actually recently moved to a full-time model. So there are opportunities in both. And I think the last thing that I would add about this sort of daily deal product space is that internet businesses are the trends in internet businesses are pretty cyclical. And I think last year, these sort of daily deal websites were everywhere, and all of these companies were hiring really aggressively. And I think this year it's tapered off fairly significantly. But that being said, what I have found since working at Google is that a lot of online retailers are moving towards this, what they call a social shopping experience. And I'm no expert at this. I'm sure somebody else can talk about this more than I can. But from a writing point of view, social shopping seems to be where everyone is moving. And what that means is that retailers no longer just put their products online and hope that somebody buys it. They're trying to build these communities of shoppers, and they need a lot of editorial on their websites in order to do that. And that's one of the places where someone with a writing background could really find a niche, I think.
Thanks.
Hi, Pollyanna. and I am currently a corporate communication specialist at Adobe
Pollyanna,
Systems.
can I ask you to speak up?
Oh, yeah, sure, sorry. So what that means basically is I write newsletters for the employees at Adobe. I edit them, I create flyers at Adobe, and these are all internal things, so I work internally. And I also conduct surveys with employees and gather statistics from our employees about employee meetings and other things. And I also conduct interviews and write articles from those interviews of employees. And that involves, like, I think the tool set that I came into Adobe with was kind of bare. I had experience with InDesign from actually Read magazine, because I was the art director for that last year, 2 years ago, and also had some Photoshop experience. And I think that's basically what got me the job, is knowing these skills. And even though they are kind of on the surface, I think the ability to develop them is really important to land a job in any kind of technical field. And I'm just lucky because it happens to be that most of the people on my team are actually English majors, and we're under the general umbrella of marketing at Adobe. And of course, when people say Adobe, you think, oh, Photoshop or PDFs and stuff like that. But what I found out is people really, really want to kind of be outside of that kind of general stereotype, and we're more than just Photoshop and PDF. We're just about the general digital experience that people can have online. And with our latest offering, Creative Cloud CS6, that just came out in April, and also the Marketing Cloud that came out recently, we're trying to combine both the creative and the like stat/number part of the digital experience world, and to sell that to people. And yeah.
Cool. As Nick said, I'm Paul Coutts. I currently work as a digital marketing manager at Google, which basically means I work within the marketing department that basically is responsible for marketing every Google product. Everything from our business-to-business advertising service, AdWords, to Google Offers, Google Chrome, Nexus phones, all that sort of stuff. I have worked at Google for about 7.5 years, which is ancient in Google years. But I've had a variety of roles while I've been there. I originally started, as Nick mentioned, and as you guys overheard us talking about, my degree originally was in broadcast journalism. I worked in the broadcast journalism field for about a year after I graduated. Wasn't really feeling it. Wasn't exactly the career path that I guess decided that I wanted to pursue. So I tried a couple different angles, realized that I still enjoyed a lot of the writing and communication aspect of my journalism degree. So from there, I ended up networking with some folks and eventually landed at Google, where when I originally started, I was working on basically working with advertisers. So external companies who wanted to advertise on Google's search engine and on Google's different properties. There's a lot of copywriting and a lot of communication, really building, really working with these advertisers to figure out sort of how they could get their message across to consumers that were using Google as a search engine to try to sell their product or communicate their message or whatever their goal might be. I did that for about 4 years, and then a couple years ago I moved over into the Google marketing side, which essentially utilized a lot of the same skills around how do we get the message around the various products that Google has to offer. How do we get that message out to consumers? How do we figure out how to message to someone what the benefits of the Google Chrome browser are going to be, or why they should buy a Google Nexus phone from us? A lot of my day involves working with individual marketing teams, developing media plans for the individual products that we're launching. So my team basically works to figure out what the message is going to be around the product and sort of how do we want to advertise it to these different users. Do we want to use TV ads? Do we want to use print ads? Do we want to use something online? How do we want to get that message across?
All right.
As Nick said, I'm Wyatt. I work for network strategy. I joined the company in February of 2009, and this was actually shortly after the company was established, which is August 2008. And so I've had the awesome experience of actually growing and learning with a company. And I think this is something that is actually a very available opportunity here, especially in the Silicon Valley, because there's so many startups. If you look on Craigslist, if you look on Chambers, all kinds of small business groups, networking opportunities, there's really quite a lot out there, not necessarily in the large companies, but in these small companies that are trying to grow and get a foothold. My title is technically marketing coordinator, but because we're so small, I have a lot of responsibilities. It includes maintaining the website content, writing flyers, brochures. Because my bosses actually came from Iran, they don't speak English very well. It's been a good opportunity to be able to take their information, their technical information, and have to translate that into something that somebody from a non-technical background can understand. And it's just been great working with them, and I think that when you can work in such an environment where it's very laid back, you can kind of introduce yourself into the larger corporate world, and it becomes an easier step for you.
All right. Yeah, I wanted to mention that about startups. I often, my wife and I, who works in a tech company also, often berate ourselves for not moving here after we graduated from college and just living poor and trying to work for some up-and-coming startup. I mean, of course, I did work for some companies that were small and did go out of business, and that's the risk you take when you work for a startup. But better to take that risk when you're young, before you have kids and bills and this sort of thing. You could even still be on your parents' health insurance, thanks to Obamacare. And I think that's a great opportunity that is available to you as students in this area. And I would encourage you to do what Tara said and look even on Craigslist. I mean, because these small companies don't have the budget to go on monster.com and advertise jobs, because you have to pay for that. That's not free, but Craigslist is free. And they're pretty much going by their bootstraps and whatever money their friends and family gave them, or angel investors, or, so anyway, there's a lot of opportunity. It makes me very excited to imagine if I were in my early 20s, in this area. I think it would be a good place to be.
Yeah, to your point, Nick, I actually did start at a startup, I think in 2009, while I was still going to school here, worked part-time for a startup remotely. And it was like a social/marketing company in Redwood City, and they were super small. And I actually worked my butt off for like 2 summers, 40 hours a week, under about 200, 500 a week. So it was like really like below, way below what I was supposed to be paid. But I was an intern technically. Yeah. So then I eventually got hired as a contractor after those 2 summers. But I think that experience really helped with kind of cementing like what I should expect from like Silicon Valley in terms of like startups, and how, if I start small, that's fine, because, I'm still in school and, I can still find other things to do. But yeah, that actually led to a really short stint as a tech writer at Juniper Networks.
A tech writer?
A tech writer.
Oh, tech writer.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Juniper. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
They're in Mountain View, right?
They're in Sunnyvale.
Sunnyvale. Okay. So I wanted to ask the panel at large, what roles do you see in tech companies? Specifically for English majors? I mean, is this a question of English majors reinventing themselves to fit into the mold of these companies, or are there places within these companies where English majors are perfectly well suited?
I definitely think that's the case. I mean, looking at Google, probably half the people in our marketing department have English degrees. I think, especially when you're talking about a tech company, there's a huge need for someone to essentially translate what all the engineers and the hardcore technology guys are building and putting into products, and essentially take that and sort of translate it into something that the general population can understand and be able to utilize. There's opportunities, as some of the other panelists have said, for being things like tech writers, but also being just communication strategists and copywriters and things like that. There's lots of folks who are sort of building all these products, but they're engineers. They're not necessarily going to know how to explain that to the average consumer, what that actually means for them, how to use that technology. And I think that's where folks that know how to write very well and can explain concepts and ideas can find a very easy niche to fit into.
I think because technology will always be changing, will always be evolving, there will always be a need for instruction on how to use that technology.
Yep.
And so you have to be able to write procedures in such a way that anyone can understand, like Paul was saying. You have to consider that your audience is going to range from very technical to very inexperienced. So I think that there's definitely a place for English majors because of that need. Technology is communication.
And the one other point that I'd add is I think a lot of the lines are blurring as far as sort of what's media and what's advertising, and with the addition of sort of social networking being laid on top of what a lot of these companies are doing, there's a lot more opportunity for people who can speak very eloquently to an audience and sort of get a message across very well. And I think as those lines continue to blur, there's going to be new opportunities that will pop up, roles that may not have been present in sort of traditional companies or traditional tech companies that are becoming available.
Yeah. How would you recommend that students from the humanities or journalism who are interested in working in tech stay informed on these new developments? I mean, is that important? And if so, what's the source? How do you stay current? What would your advice be on that?
I think for me, at least, because I work with IT, we manage and maintain networks, computer networks for businesses. So it becomes a lot easier because we're constantly in that environment. We know what technology is coming out. We know what's the best way to manage our work with a computer. I think that subscribing to various magazines, like Computer Network World or something like that. I'm not sure. There's
so trade journals
yes.
is the larger title for those. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Yep. So those are definitely a resource, and white papers from various companies like Adobe, Google, Juniper. Those are good too.
I think there's lots of websites as well that sort of track the trends in technology. There's like TechMeme and TechCrunch, and some of those types of sites that are doing their best to try to keep up with the new technologies that are coming out and new sort of roles and companies that are coming on the scene. It's great to be able to just check in with those sites and sort of see what's new, what's hot, what's the technology that is on top of everyone's mind. Because I think if you can figure out what that sort of next trend is and be very comfortable talking about it and discussing it, figuring out how it sort of fits into the bigger picture, that's going to give you a leg up on everybody else that's not doing that. So that when those new jobs and new roles start being developed, if you have that advantage of understanding sort of what's hot at that moment, you can speak to it in a way that nobody else can.
Pollyanna or Kirstin, you want to add anything on that?
I mean, I think that I have probably a pretty different perspective from other people on the panel, but I guess what I will say to that is, as someone who first and foremost is a fiction writer, there is a place to work in tech and to have a job that that pays the bills and that's fulfilling in its own way, but really doesn't take up more mind space than it has to. And so I think that for me, I've managed to, when I was working at Google, I managed to compartmentalize my two worlds very effectively for what I needed to do. I needed to finish my novel. And so I think that there's a place for that too, for people who aren't necessarily looking to build a career in tech. It's still a great way to support yourself so that you can do what you want to do.
How would you recommend that humanities grads and journalism grads, English majors, represent themselves in their resumes and their job interviews? Is it best to push the sort of English or humanities-specific skills to the forefront, or to emphasize that you're an English major but really a techie? I mean, which is a better approach, or neither, or what do you recommend?
Because technology is changing so rapidly, it's interesting to realize that people from 10 years ago who had experience with technology and don't keep up with it are no longer going to be able to work in that environment.
That's an interesting point.
And so no matter what, you have to constantly learn. And I learn things new every day. And with that in mind, I mean, training is always a possibility. It's always easy. It's always more available than finding somebody who's super experienced.
So I guess what you're suggesting is suggest to the employer or the interviewer that you're open to learning?
Yes,
Yeah.
definitely, that you
Okay.
adapt well.
You
and
adapt well,
that
okay.
you can learn.
I would also say, think about, don't get caught up in titles in a sense. If you're looking at different jobs or different careers, look at the requirements that would make you successful in that career and figure out how your resume would sort of fit into that, rather than looking at, oh, well, that says, technical writer, I don't have a lot of technical experience. Looking at that job and saying, well, but it requires communication. It requires being able to explain complex propositions to, a very unsavvy user. Looking at that and saying, well, what in my experience, what in my resume allows me to do that, and sort of emphasizing those traits, rather than looking at it and saying, well, I don't have official technical experience being a technical writer, so I'm not a fit for this job.
Yeah.
I would say my skills as an English major definitely helped with getting a job. Just saying editing was under my resume, and copy editing, and just being that kind of detail-oriented person that I think most English majors are, when it comes to language at least. Mm-hmm. And I did make it a point to say, I love language, I love communicating, and that definitely fit into the bill. And I think there are plenty of jobs like that require I think all jobs kind of in a way require some sort of communication skill, and that's definitely marketable, I think.
Yeah, especially around here. It seems like technical talent abounds, but verbal talent is in much shorter supply. The problem is a lot of the decision makers are technical people, and it's sometimes difficult, in my experience, to persuade them that they need you. Do you have any advice on that or any thoughts?
Well, that's why I think it kind of goes back to what I was saying before, which is look at the gaps that you could fill in their current, if it's a startup in their roster of employees, or even if it's a larger company, sort of where you fit into the mold and the larger vision of what they're trying to do. I think it's easier to sell yourself if you say, look, I can take these complex concepts and explain them to, whatever users might be out there. I can help your engineers be more efficient, those sorts of traits.
Efficiency.
Ding. Yep.
Yeah.
So I think, figuring out where you can sort of benefit that company. Because it's true, a lot of the senior executives at a lot of tech companies are techies. They're engineers, they're product managers, they're people who think in a very linear fashion about problems. And I think, they're not necessarily going to understand why they need someone to help them with their communications or their writing within the company. But I think if you can sort of show them as logically as possible why they need this role and why you would be the best fit for that role, that's going to help you stick in their heads.
Something to consider sort of on the company scale, not necessarily an employee scale, is my company attends monthly mixers with our chamber. So we'll network with other companies about our size in our area.
And the chamber is the Chamber of Commerce,
Yes.
Right? The Silicon Valley Chamber?
The Santa Clara.
Santa Clara, okay.
But something that I tell a lot of the other businesses, the other decision makers, is that we had a client, landscaping company, that came to us and told us that they had lost a huge client because they looked at their website and it didn't explain adequately their services. And so this is something that we have also experienced early on in our development, and it is a necessity in this day and age to have an online resource that communicates as much as it can about your company and what it can do for others.
What I wanted to ask also, because we do want to save some time for questions, but I wanted to ask about the procedural questions about getting a job, which I know can be really daunting for recent grads especially. They think, well, Professor Taylor, you're saying you looked in the Washington Post and there were ads. Well, the Mercury News doesn't even have job ads anymore. There isn't even a newspaper anymore. What do I do? And obviously some of you mentioned networking is a way that you got to the place where you are now. How do you do that? What is that?
I think I would say there's a couple ways that I would recommend networking. I'd say make sure you're on LinkedIn. A lot of recruiters look at that, and that's how they sort of find applicants, and they'll come to you rather than you even having to come to them, but they have lots of job listings on there as well. I'd also say attend trade functions. There's lots of those types of conferences that happen here in the Bay Area for everything from networking solutions to social media to all kinds of technology. Obviously being the heart of Silicon Valley, this is a great opportunity. But attending those conferences, getting to know people at the booths, just making those types of connections is a great way to find out what some of these companies are all about, and then also to be able to meet folks that could potentially help you and help guide you towards opportunities within their companies.
Mm-hmm.
Well, on a somewhat related, it doesn't quite answer your question about networking, but in terms of how to get a job, or how I got my job at least, with the kind of copywriting jobs that I was looking at, these companies actually required writing samples, and so they advertise on their websites, and they give a prompt, and you write a prompt and send it in. And so for me, that felt like something that was right in my comfort zone. I'm a writer.
Yeah.
I can write.
Essay test.
Exactly. I can do this. I can do a writing sample. And so it was nice. It was nice to know that I felt confident about it, and it was nice to know that I had the skills right away that were required, because that's what I had to do, right? Do a writing sample. And I think that's pretty common for this kind of copywriting position.
Yeah. And one thing I would add is, I don't know how many of you have been to any traditional right up the middle career center presentations on how to present your resume or anything like that, but usually there's a resume and there's a cover letter. And the cover letter, which sometimes is submitted online these days, maybe a cover email, is how you explain what it is you can't see in the resume. It's the narrative, it's the story of why you are right for this job. And I feel that any writer, or really anyone with training in communications of any kind, is doing themselves a horrible disservice by not writing a cover letter, because that's what we do well, and a well-written letter is going to catch attention. And that, even when there isn't a writing prompt that's part of the job application, you create your own writing prompt and give your own writing sample, and that's what the cover letter is. So I often tell students, make sure you do a cover letter. And don't do it at 2 o'clock in the morning and then send it off while only doing a spell check or something. Be sure to proofread it, because there's no grade involved here. You're just making yourself look bad, if you have any sort of grammatical errors or anything like that. And employers do scrutinize those very carefully.
Mm-hmm.
Something that's interesting that I've actually experienced with Juniper, I interviewed twice with Juniper, and I had done a little design. I don't know why I did, but the interviewer was actually really impressed with the overall layout as well. And so not
on your resume?
Yeah, on the resume itself. And so if you're going into a position, or you want a position that involves a design sort of aspect, which a lot of writing, I think, incorporates, then if you do something like that, not too much, but just very subtle, it helps.
Yeah, it's like a visual cue to your style. And it is true that in a lot of these companies, you'll be forced into wearing lots of different hats, even in large companies. That's just the way that the workplace is these days. You don't just stay in one role for your whole career. It's even rare to stay at a company, like Paul said, for 7.5 years. That's exceedingly rare these days. But if you read between the lines with Paul's experience, he's been in many different roles at that company in 7.5 years. So it's almost like different companies.
It is, and I think, when I first started at the company, there were 2,000 full-time employees, and as we were saying, there's 50 some odd thousand at this point. And I've probably had maybe 10 different roles. I mean, they've revolved around the same general areas, but there's always new opportunities. And I think with a lot of companies in Silicon Valley, they're constantly kind of growing and changing and reinventing themselves. And so that gives you a lot of different opportunities to sort of try out different experiences and build on what you're learning.
Yeah, that's definitely the case too with Adobe. We're only about 11,000 people strong, but we're definitely a global company, and we have locations like across America and Asia and Canada, and I see it as an opportunity for me too to travel, and I think eventually, like I just started in February, by the way, and I feel like after a couple years, it's definitely feasible to find a different job within Adobe and to move to, like, I don't know, the New York office or to go to the Tokyo office, and it's just a matter of really exploring that company and kind of getting comfortable first in your position, and then once you think you can expand and go do something else, then it's definitely a good idea to just kind of dig around in the company and to see what's out there.
And if you have other languages, by all means, tout that.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's a big
In your cover letter, tout that. Not just the last line on your resume, fluent in Mandarin, or whatever. Demonstrate it, because most of these companies are global, and if they're not, they want to be. And so one paragraph in your cover letter could spark an idea in somebody who's reading your letter. So don't sell yourself short. I think that's one of the main themes I wanted to convey with these panels is we have a lot to offer with our training, and we just need to be clever about how to present it. So I wanted to ask if you have any questions for our panelists. Don't be shy. I have plenty more. Yes?
Would you say it's a good idea to add like certain other hobbies you have, such as if you have a hobby, something outside of it, like singing, for instance, do you think that's a good thing to apply in there as well?
So speaking for Google, yes, it's a good thing. They, when Google hires people, I've hired a lot of people over my years there, and Google wants to see people that are well-rounded. They want to see that you're more than just someone who sat in a room and studied all day long. They want to see that you have interests outside of just what you have your degree in. Because I think the phrase that we like to use is that we hire athletes. We want to hire people that are comfortable in a lot of different areas, wearing different hats, can move between responsibilities easily, and so I think showing on your resume that you're well-rounded in that way is really helpful.
I've applied to many different places, also Google maybe like 5 times. But, I've always heard that you want your resume to stand out from every other applicant's. And I can't seem to make mine stand out enough since I'm a recent grad. And how do you get that experience on your resume if you don't really have it? Because they won't hire you with that experience. How do I get myself to stand out?
So the question, if I could just restate it for the microphone, is you need experience to get a job, and if you're a recent grad, you don't have experience, right? This is the question? Age-old question.
Yep.
Any thoughts on that?
Well, if you can dig back to the past, like did you volunteer anywhere? Did you have any extracurricular things that you could possibly put in your resume? I included some scholarships I had, different awards, just things like that even can count as experience, because that shows that you did something to gain that award. Or even because as I said, I worked part-time my last few years at San Jose State, so that helped a lot with just, even if it was part-time, it's still something. If you've had any jobs that can somehow relate to what you're looking for, just listing that I think is a good idea.
Well, in your case, Pollyanna, you were the art director for a journal, a 200-page literary journal, and you laid the whole thing out using Adobe's products.
Exactly, I know.
Why would that's as good a job credential for a job at Adobe as pretty much anything else, right?
Yeah.
And you could bring the book to the job interview.
I did.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
it's not just an idea, it's actually physical.
Yeah, I would also say, look for, temp positions or vendor positions that would allow you to get experience, even if it's only for a couple of months with, you know, a small company. Getting that experience on your resume can help you to, you know, first of all, get paid, which is always a good thing, but also allow you to sort of build up that little bit of credibility that will help you to show that you're a good fit for that position. I'd also say, you know, obviously internships can be helpful along those lines as well if you have the ability to do an internship. But even if it's a limited amount of experience, just having that little bit can give you the edge when you go back and apply.
Yeah.
I definitely agree with Paul because of my own experiences personally. Like I said, I've applied to Juniper, I've applied to Hitachi, but my experiences at Network Strategy has allowed me to learn, for example, I've learned Photoshop, Illustrator, I've learned Excel VBA, how to program, learned a little bit of HTML, and so when you have these extra skills, you have an environment where you can actually devote a little more time to specializing them, and then you can add that on your resume later, and you can, like Paul said, try again.
And I would even say, you know, something that I know folks that I've helped hire in the past have done is actually going on something, again, to bring up LinkedIn, but looking at people who currently work at that company and seeing what some of their experiences are like and trying to emulate some of those experiences. What do they have skills in? What classes have they taken? What certifications do they have? Getting an idea for what tools someone who already works at that company has at their fingertips can give you ideas for things that you can emulate that would make you a better target for that company.
Yeah. I also think it's in some ways a really good thing to have experience applying and being rejected from jobs, because it allows you to develop perseverance, which you're going to need throughout your career, because you're not going to be at this job that you get for the rest of your life. It's almost assured. And so you will be applying for other jobs in your life after this. And it's sort of like I tell my writing students, send your stuff out. Who cares if it gets rejected? In fact, you know, writers have all these rules about when you get a rejection in the mail, don't let it sit on your desk more than 24 hours before you send it off to another publication. And the idea there is keeping yourself resilient, you know, and keeping hope alive and this sort of thing. But what I find it to be useful for is it lowers the stakes for each application that you do. So when you send one out, you're like, we'll see what happens, you know. How many do you have out? Oh, I got 20 out, you know. And if something comes in, great, but you're not expecting it to.
Right. And for me too, when I was job searching before I got my gig at Adobe, I pretty much job hunted every day on multiple search engines. I use Indeed.com, LinkedIn, Monster, just, you know, searching for editing/writing jobs, and I would come upon lots of them. And I would make it a goal to at least sign up or submit applications to maybe 5 a day, and that's a lot. But just keeping that flow going, and maybe I'll hear back from a couple of them, but that's fine because it's expected on my end that, you know, I'll get maybe a couple responses, and who knows how far it'll go, but just getting yourself out there, I think, is the best thing you can do.
And if you have the time, customize each one.
Yeah.
You don't just send your... That's why in some ways a place like Monster is not great, because it allows you to just submit without any sort of personalization to it. I like this website called ventureloop.com. I would recommend going to that. It's a site with job listings posted by companies that are funded by a consortium of venture capital firms. And so venture capital firms are these kind of private banks that lend money to companies, invest money in companies in exchange for part of the ownership of the company. And so it's in their best interest to get these companies staffed up with lots of people so they can go out and do whatever it is they're proposing to do. And so the venture companies invest money in the site Venture Loop, and they post tons of jobs on there. I mean, tons, like hundreds every day. And why not? Take a look there, you know. And there's no way to automatically submit. They give you contact information, and you send it in, you know. But it's not just for programmers and network administrators. They have lots of different job roles. Marty, you had a question?
That was answered.
Okay.
I have a follow-up. When you submitted like 5 applications per day, would you write a cover letter for each application?
Yeah. Yeah, it wasn't fun, but had to do it.
You get better at it
Yeah,
over time.
that's true.
I mean, you could reuse some of the language, but gosh, there's nothing worse than getting an application. I've done some hiring myself in various roles where the wrong company's name is sort of a vestigial company name, and at the end of the cover letter it says, and that's why I want to work at San Francisco State. You know? Well, then go do it. And you never find out that that's why they rejected you. Any other questions? Yeah.
Do you guys plan on staying at your company forever? And do you guys like your job? What's your status of it now? Sorry, it's your job.
I love my job because of its flexibility. Like right now I can be here and I can go to class and then I can go back to work. So that's definitely an advantage while you're in school. And I think that once I graduate, I probably will seek another place. But that's, I've been here for about 4 years.
That's a lot. 4 years around here, that's tons. Yeah.
I'd say for me, I mean, obviously it's Google. It's a pretty nice place to work. But at the same time, it's not something where I say, well, I'm absolutely going to work there for the rest of my life. I'm going to work there as long as it continues to give me opportunities to grow and develop and learn new skills. And if that stops, then I'll look for the next company that allows me to do that.
For me, because I just started in February, I'm definitely planning to stay at Adobe for at least a couple years. And I think, especially at our age, like just being out of college, I think you'd be doing yourself a disservice if you stayed at a company for like over 10 years or something, because there's so many opportunities, I think, to grow and to find like other environments to be in. And I mean, I'm kind of lucky because at Adobe, at Google, there's various different environments within Adobe that I could transfer myself to and kind of be in a different world. But I mean, if you're at a startup, for example, I wouldn't stay at a startup for more than a couple years, and then maybe even that long, and then just kind of search for different opportunities, because you can always learn more, I think, by going to different companies, especially in Silicon Valley. There's just so many to choose from, and I think getting that breadth of experience is definitely to your advantage.
I signed a 1-year contract with Google when I worked with them, so my contract's over, and I knew that going into the job. But on that note, hands down, it was the best part-time job I could have asked for. So.
And Pollyanna, you said you started a startup, right? Mm-hmm. How did you know if that startup would succeed, or was it just
I didn't. Yeah, I didn't. I mean, I was, sophomore or junior at SJSU, and I was just bored. And I was like, I need an internship to kind of augment my experience. And so I just searched on Craigslist and found this thing and emailed a couple of writing samples. And I mean, of course, it was only for the summer, so I didn't expect it to be totally huge endeavor, but the fact that I worked in an office, for the first time ever, kind of even gave me that experience, just working with people in an office, having a cube, and kind of interfacing with different teams. And I think that's valuable, and even if they did fail when I was there, it wouldn't have been a big loss on my part because I was still in school. So, for me, it was just an add-on to what I already had. So.
Maybe one more? Tram?
Well, we were talking, since you guys were talking about foreign languages, I was actually kind of interested in becoming a translator. How would you emphasize that to go into that kind of field?
So the question is about becoming a translator.
I have actually seen several jobs on Craigslist for Mandarin to English, English to Mandarin, a whole bunch of different languages. And so have you looked at all on Craigslist?
Not at those.
I would try looking in the technical as well as the etc., the writing gigs, as much as you can, because they do pop up.
Following that, what if your skills are questionable? Would you recommend going to school to brush up on those skills?
For a foreign language?
Yeah.
Is it something that you'd speak at home, or is it?
It's something I understand at home.
I guess it depends on what they need, on what they require.
Yeah, if they want someone who's going to be translating documents, in other words, writing in this foreign language, then you would have to prove that you can do that. But if you're just serving as a liaison with a team in that country verbally, then
Yep.
it would, I mean, I'm just thinking as a hiring manager here, then that would work, potentially.
Yep.
They'd mainly be hiring you for your skill as an English speaker, though, you know?
Ideally, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's probably safe to say that everyone who's in this room or will be watching this video has good English skills, you know? I mean, that's the name of the major, but you do need to prove that also. So. Well, thank you so much, panelists, for coming, and I wish you all the best. And can we give them a round of applause?